Common enemy. Why not common goal?
I'm listening.
I don't want any more trouble from the NYPD. Why not work with me and cut out the annoying middle? I can offer you so much more.
Leverage, chess moves, and playing enemies against one another. Tariq and Monet's plan was to turn Noma and Carter against each other, but it does seem like it has backfired. In the streets, it seems like we've got Drew vs Kane round 2, and Davis McLean, in my opinion, is playing a very dangerous game, and we all know what happened to Obi. Going forward, could Power also give us their very own version of a Red Wedding? As usual, in this recap and breakdown for episode 8, we're going to focus on all the major talking points from Higher Calling, looking at a bunch of clues, Easter eggs, along with a theory or two. And there are some big talking points that you may not have realized, for example, an Italian connection. So stick with this breakdown right through to the very end. We'll be focusing on the theme of chess moves, leverage, and how Tariq and Monet's plan backfired, but also the key person who might eventually help win this war.
From that Noma shit to whatever the fuck happened earlier, I need to get back in the driver's seat. I gotta control every fucking piece. That's the only way I can protect me and my family. You know, my dad did a lot of dumb shit that I never agreed with, but I got a lot of him in me. You know, I realized to get what the fuck I want, I gotta use all the good parts of him, the bad parts of him, and the good parts and the bad parts of me. I gotta put it all to use to get what I want. I gotta become the apex predator.
I like the sound of...
I know you don't like it, but the boy gangster. He's born in him. Better than you at that age. He cold with it. And you the meanest little nigga I've met.
Now, this episode kicks off with Detective Carter grieving the loss of Detective Felicia Marie Lewis. He was at the church talking to the priest, and he mentioned that the paramedics on the scene said that she died on impact, which I do think we have to question. What we saw play out in 407, in all honesty, was a very messy murder scene, so I'm not too sure how Detective Carter made it look like an accident, but that's also how Detective Carter was trying to sell it to his task force. In the space of 2 episodes, they haven't just lost Felicia Lewis, they've also lost Kamal Tate. They also really homed in on the message that Felicia Lewis is leaving behind a small son who has now become an orphan, and I will come back around to the impact it's having on Diana later on. However, with Nico Halston, we always knew that he'd question this death. There was no way he was going to believe that Felicia Lewis just died from an accident. It just seemed way too much of a coincidence. He was already beginning to question Carter on Kamal Tate's death, and he definitely didn't buy this story in regards to Felicia Lewis's death. And even though later on he came to Carter to tell him how Noma made him an offer, I do think he may still potentially be one to watch. Now, Monet and Tariq knew that they had to do something to get Carter off their backs. The problem that they found was, they didn't want to give the information on Noma, only for them to end up in her crosshairs. They found themselves in a really sticky situation, but Tariq's plan was right. They had to keep their hands clean and, in essence, use Noma, play them against each other. Of course, that's a very risky game in itself, but I do think it was the right plan. It just needed the perfect execution. Now, after the death of Zion, there was always a void to fill over at 4th Circle, and thanks to Detective Carter's help, Drew was now the man in charge. Just like how he wanted more of a lieutenant role, a role which commands more respect and leadership, he's finally found his place. Both Kane and Drew are very similar. They've always wanted something of their own. They've always wanted to be treated with respect. For Drew, we've seen him yo-yo between the love he has for art and being in the game. But now that he does have this position of power, if that's what he thinks, he's now happy. However, what that's also done is put him against his own brother in the streets, and we are going to come back around to Kane vs Drew round 2 later on in this breakdown. Now, over at Stansfield, Brayden was questioning Tariq about him mentioning that they said that they were supposed to be on their Apex Predator shit, as he was packing his bags ready to move in with Elle. But with Carter in the way, Tariq's finding it very difficult to make the move that he wants. I also did find myself agreeing with Brayden. Even though he's been on coke and starting to slowly lose control, he's always telling Tariq to think about the next move. He was warning Carter was a cop, the head of a drug task force. What Tariq wanted to do in terms of taking him off the chessboard, there was 1,000 ways that this could go left. However, something else that could go left is his relationship with Elle. And Ghost used to say something very similar to Tommy back in Power. You don't even know her. But with Brayden, he was in love. Now, unfortunately, when he did go over to Elle, Rashandria was there in a real panic because Elle seemed to have OD'd. But not only did she almost OD on the stepped on coke, she also had sickle cell, and so they had to quickly rush her to the hospital. While she was in a life or death situation, Brayden took her phone to find out where she got the bad coke from, because the doctor told him that the coke that she'd taken was laced with fentanyl, and that's when Brayden knew he had to make a move on Steve. It also reminded me of the time there was someone selling bad coke in Club Truth. It could have turned really messy for Ghost in terms of the image of Club Truth. So he sent Tommy to deal with the situation. In that case, Tommy wasn't stupid enough to kill him like Brayden did later on, and it is going to be a huge problem that Tariq and Brayden find themselves in. Now over at the penthouse, we had a meeting between Noma, Monet, Kane and Tariq. They were here because they had a common enemy in Detective Carter. Tariq and Monet's plan was to get Noma to do their dirty work for them by telling Noma Detective Carter was closing in on her organization. However, not just once, Noma questioned what does Detective Carter actually know about her organization, which they couldn't answer. They kind of just swerved around the question and said Detective Carter can basically do whatever he wants. This is also where Monet learned about the red wedding that we're about to see in episode 9.
Red, red, red.
This relationship definitely isn't about love, and I also don't think it's going to go down the way Noma thinks. And Monet, she certainly wasn't happy either, even though it seems like it's a business transaction for Kane. Is it such a good idea to get deeper involved with someone like Noma? Someone who was happy to just get rid of Obi, even though all he did was serve her so loyally. I don't think the wedding is going to go down the way we think, and we may just have Power's very own kind of Game of Thrones type of red wedding. Now Effie was also summoned, because Noma wanted her marriage to seem legit, and her job for Effie was to give Kane a social media profile. And in regards to what she thought about Noma and Kane's marriage, let's just say, she wasn't impressed. Especially after Kane's kiss on the forehead, how much she told her he cared about her, and basically making her way back at his penthouse and not returning. Someone else who wasn't impressed was Davis McLean. He came in with the documents that Noma needed, including a prenup. Noma's not that stupid to sign a marriage certificate without protecting all of her assets, and also her legit businesses, without having a prenup, which also raised questions with Davis. He couldn't believe she was marrying Kane, because he thought he was the one who was actually going to turn into her business partner. We all know Davis McLean is an opportunist when he smells money or a position which benefits him, whatever position that may be. Davis McLean is always ready to pounce, and he wasn't happy at the fact that Kane provided her with a solution that he couldn't, because he was still kind of going through a divorce. There was also this back and forth between Kane and Davis, which again, we may want to keep our eyes on, especially because of the chess moves we did see in episode 8 from Davis McLean. On one hand, Davis came to rescue Noma from Detective Carter, something which he actually set up. On the other hand, Kane is again what Noma likes to call playing schoolboy antics, this time with his brother Drew. So, this whole Kane and Davis scenario, we might not have heard or seen the last of it. Now, with Davis McLean, throughout season 4, a lot of us know that he's been playing a very dangerous game. He lost his law license earlier or is suspended. He lost his brother towards the end of season 3, and is also now going through his divorce. He then felt the only option was to step into the streets, embracing the criminal side to his enterprise. But he's been towing the fine line between both Noma and Tariq. So, I do think Tariq was right in warning him. You only have to look at what she did to Obi. With that being said, Davis gave Tariq and Monet the information on Noma's organization, although I am pretty surprised Tariq hasn't tapped into this flash drive.
This is Agent Young's evidence against your boss, proving she's a drug supplier.
Tariq still has a flash drive from Junior, who conducted an entire investigation into Noma's drug world. Or could he potentially be saving it for another rainy day? Let's wait and see. But this is where Davis gave Tariq and Monet the information to Aircraft Global, her front which washes her drug money. She's after some new government contracts from a new government official, Sterling Reynolds, and that's the information that Tariq and Monet needed to give to Detective Carter. Over at Full Circle, we saw Kane coming to see Drew. Now, we've been through the complex relationship between the two throughout season 4, which dates all the way back to season 1. They found themselves in a very similar position towards the end of season 1, where they were kind of against each other, but not to this magnitude.
So which is it, Drew? Because either you with me, or you against me.
They also found themselves throwing verbal punches outside the ring. On one hand, you had someone who was working for a dirty cop. On the other hand, you had Kane who was still working for Noma. Earlier in the season we had both of them trying to get into this position of power under Noma, but where Kane kinda won. However, as I mentioned before, both of these Tejadas, they want to be the top dog. It goes all the way back to when Lorenzo was released from prison. They want to be the leaders of their respective organizations, and now that both of them kind of are, so they think, they now find themselves against each other. Now, this marriage was always going to raise questions with Monet, Effie, Davis McLean, but also Anya Covington. She questioned her mom about getting married to someone half her age and also someone who's frankly a thug. Noma called it a business transaction, But that raised further questions when it came to Anya.
Look, I hear what you're saying, but I wonder what you're not telling me.
Anya has always questioned her mom for what she does for a living. She's not stupid. She knows her mother isn't telling the full truth, but she's also probably never really kind of pushed Noma and questioned her. Well, in this conversation, she did. Although Noma fed her the bullshit story and threw all the blame on her father, Francesco Lombardi. She said he was a drug dealer, and because of his drug dealing ways, she now has law enforcement breathing down her neck. However, I don't think Anya believed a word she said. You could tell, she knew that her mom was lying. Now, as we're on the topic of this wedding, Monet came to see Kane to see what was going through his head in terms of marrying Noma, and I do have to agree with her stance. A sham marriage to that crooked bitch isn't going to put Kane on top. On that note, neither will Drew's deal with Detective Carter. But Monet was right. The prenup, what Noma did to Obi, how Noma's been treating Kane over the last few episodes. Kane will never get the respect he's looking for, or the control that he's looking for in the organization for as long as Noma's in charge. They also spoke about Detective Carter, and Monet being forced to work for Carter, and I still do feel, eventually Kane will still end up siding with Monet over Noma, especially because Noma's now made a deal with Detective Carter behind Kane's back. In Kane's mind, it's a partnership, but that couldn't be further from the truth. So, when Kane does find out, despite the animosity that's still lingering around with the Tejadas, I do feel like Kane will help his family and also Tariq to bring down both Noma and Detective Carter. He genuinely could be the key. Now, interrupting this conversation was also Anya Covington. She was here to see her now, I guess, stepdad. But the real reason why she was here was because she wanted some answers. She didn't believe a word of what Noma said during their dinner. She wanted the truth about who her mother really was, and she questioned, is her mother a drug dealer? Anya definitely knows, but I also feel like she's kind of putting a blind eye to it as well, because of the benefits that comes with it. Back in Power, Tariq told something very similar to Raina when they were younger. She chose not to see who Ghost really was, because he'd always buy her nice things. But let's see whether it really does cause issues between Anya and Noma's relationship, because this wedding is definitely coming up. Now with Diana, she couldn't bear the guilt of what she did in 407, turning Felicia Lewis's kid into an orphan. She came to open up to Tariq, because not only are they in this together, Tariq's also done some pretty messed up shit in his time, and he reminded Diana, it was you or her. She did do what needed to be done. Now I always wondered, where are they going to take Diana and Tariq's relationship? Both of them seem like they wanted to be together and make things work. But with what's kind of happened to Diana in terms of her losing the baby, it was normal for her to kind of press forward and kind of replace what she's lost. Like Brushandria told her later on, it's normal for her to want a baby so soon after losing one. However, is it the right time and with the right person? I think we could all agree, probably not. We also can't forget about all the times Diana has betrayed Tariq, snooped through all his shit, lied and manipulated him. I genuinely do feel both of them do need a clean slate. Now, as the night was coming to a close, we had this meeting between Carter, Drew, Monet and Tariq. They were here to give Carter the leverage that he was looking for over Noma. The information that they gave him was Sterling Reynolds, and how he was the plug that would get Noma her government contracts. We also saw Monet trying to make sense of Drew's decision making, in terms of working for Detective Carter. She asked him what about his dream of pursuing art. Unfortunately, it's way too late for Monet to be pushing Drew down the path of art, but also notice a difference in the way she kind of approaches the situation with Kane and the way she speaks to Drew. She's always treated Kane differently to the way she's treated Drew or Diana. In Drew's eyes, what he's doing he believes is the best for the Tejadas, but again, that couldn't be further from the truth. Now the following morning, as Drew comes to Full Circle, he realizes that the building was bought by Kane and Noma, and this is where the chess game really started to begin between the two brothers. Drew came to the penthouse to see what information he could find. He logged into Kane's laptop and found there was a shipment that was being delivered this evening. And let's not forget, Drew used to work for Noma, and so he's probably familiar with all the routes that they take. That's the information he would have fed to Detective Carter, and that's how they were able to intercept this shipment of drugs later on. But let's just rewind it back a second. As Drew and Detective Carter were trying to figure out a way to hit Noma, Drew mentioned that Noma provides guns for the Italians in the Lower East. Now, with just 2 episodes left, I do kind of find it hard to see how they would introduce a new character or crew at this moment in time. However, going forward, I wouldn't be surprised if this could potentially be a small Easter egg to what could potentially be coming next in terms of a next Power spin-off.
The head of the Cervello mob, that color Cervello?
He's my great uncle.
Of course he is. Of course he is.
I did reference to the Italians, specifically Elisa Marie's family, well over a year ago, and I still think it could be a possibility. So that definitely is one to watch. Have they just kind of linked out what could potentially be the next Power spin-off? Let me know what you think. Now over at Stansfield, we saw Tariq receiving a call from Brayden, who wanted to make a move on Steve, the guy who supplied Elle with the bad coke. He said all he wanted to do was scare him, but we all know how that turned out. However, just sticking to what we saw at Stansfield, in the classroom, we saw how Diana was still struggling to come to terms with killing Felicia Lewis. Taking away this young boy's mother is really beginning to play on her mind. She also later went to Brushandria for advice, who told her, forget about Tariq. It's normal for her to want a baby so soon after losing one, but she knows so many young mothers whose lives have basically stopped because they have to care for their child. Maybe it just wasn't the right time for Diana or even with the right person, and I do have to agree with Brushandria. Now we also finally got an answer to a question we've been asking for a very long time. Who is Effie's mom? They made reference to her being a drunk back in Power, especially after her brother was killed in a robbery gone wrong. And I did mention in my Effie breakdown this past week, there can only be one of two reasons why she's here now. Either she's in trouble financially, or she's finally become sober and realized all the mistakes she's made. Unfortunately, it was no surprise that she was here asking for money, but also because her partner, Richard, has left her.
My mom always had a different guy around, and one of them liked to touch me. I was watching this Oprah episode, and I finally worked up the nerve to tell her what was going on. Do you want to know what she did? She married the asshole.
Richard was the same person that sexually abused Effie, a story we heard way back in 306. Now, as Effie told her she wouldn't even piss on a fire if she was set on flames, her mom really did stick it to her, calling her a bitch and questioning, how is anybody gonna love someone like her? Which also makes kind of sense as to why she's kind of always so independent. But when she does have someone like Kane by her side, who does things for her with no agenda attached, she really does love it, because she's never really had anybody care for her in the way Kane seems to be doing before. From paying her tuition, helping her with product, trying to get her freedom back from Noma, Kane really does care for Effie, something which she's probably never got from her mother. Now, the interception of the drug shipment we saw from Detective Carter was only one of Noma's problems. As she was having a meeting with Sterling Reynolds, she was being watched and listened to by Detective Carter. Soon after, Davis came in to have Noma's back, which he actually set up himself by telling Tariq and Monet, who in turn told Detective Carter. So, while Davis was here saving Noma, Kane's antics against Drew was making things worse for Noma in the streets, and in turn, making Davis look good. So, after this, Noma was activated. However, another person who was also activated was Brayden Weston. He wanted to deal with Steve for dealing the bad coke to Elle, and Tariq had his back. They burst into his apartment to rough him up, and Brayden forces him to sniff the same product that put Elle into hospital over and over again. And Tariq kind of just stood back and questioned, we're only here to scare him. What he was going to do was going to kill him, and that's exactly what Brayden did. Which is actually no different to what Tariq did earlier in the season with Salim in 404. He said that this was a very messy murder, and this is how they get caught. But so was the Salim murder back in part 1. And let's see actually whether this does come back on either Brayden or Tariq, because again, they weren't wearing any gloves. So let's see, could it actually be potentially Brayden's turn to try the orange jumpsuit? Brayden also came to see Elle later on, and neither was she impressed with what Brayden did. So again, they have been spilling a lot of blood in season 4, a couple of very reckless and messy kills, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised one bit if this did come back to Brayden. Now let's get into this chess game between Detective Carter, Tariq, Monet and Noma. Tariq and Monet's idea was to play Detective Carter and Noma against each other. Noma had an idea of infiltrating Carter's dirty task force with the use of Detective Nico Halston, but his price was way too high. This meeting alone cost them 50k, but for his services going forward, it had to be 7 figures along with ongoing payments. However, was he really ready to flip on Detective Carter? I did think there was a slight chance, because he was beginning to question what happened with Kamal Tate, and the tipping point could have been what happened with Felicia Lewis. However, later on, we did see Nico telling Carter about how he was approached by Noma to make a deal, but there was no way he was going to flip on Carter. So, at least at this moment in time, he is staying loyal to Carter. Whether that changes going forward, maybe not. Now, what Carter did propose was for him to tell Noma he was willing to accept her deal, but how he wanted to meet at night on their own. Because it wasn't Detective Halston who was going to show up to that meeting, it was going to be Detective Carter. Now, this is the first meeting between Detective Carter and Noma, and while Tariq and Monet's plan was to play them against each other, all they seem to have done was bring them together. During this meeting, Noma told Detective Carter how Tariq and Monet told her that he was after her. Carter then revealed the information in regards to how they told Noma how she was going to bribe a government official. And what have we learned about Carter in season 4? He isn't afraid to play these drug dealers against each other. That's exactly what he was doing here, but with Noma. She can offer him a lot more than anybody else can. And now Tariq and Monet really find themselves up against not just Detective Carter, but also Noma. Which is also why I mentioned before, Kane is someone who will have a big decision to make going forward when it comes to this battle between Noma, Detective Carter, Monet and Tariq. Even though he doesn't like Tariq and he never will, I do feel like when push comes to shove, he will side with his family, and he will be the key to bringing down both Noma and Detective Carter. Maybe Drew as well, if he can see that bringing down Detective Carter is the right move. I still also wouldn't rule out Rashad Tate. I do think he needs to get retribution for what happened to his brother Kamal Tate. But one thing's for sure, I do think Power are setting us up for one of their very own Red Weddings. In my opinion, that wedding is definitely about to be a bloodbath. With that being said, which wasn't exactly an explosive episode 8 for Power standards, but let's see what they've got cooking for the next 2. Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.